Welcome to the Art of Humanity, where we explore creativity and consciousness to help you and your business evolve. Today's guest is Daniel Pinchbeck. He is the author of Breaking Open the Head, a psychedelic journey into the heart of contemporary shamanism, which explores philosophical and critical perspectives on shamanism and his personal transformation from a cynic to a mystic. He's a philosopher, author, psychonaut, activist, and an overall completely fascinating dude. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me on The Art of Humanity.
Thanks for having me.
I really think that the work that you're bringing into humanity and the world is just super impressive and important today. And you've been immersed in that counterculture since you were little. Your mom was part of the Beat Generation and dated Jack Kerouac. When On the Road was published back in 1957. That's just so cool to me. I know I'm just geeking out right now, but can you provide listeners with some background into your childhood and how that may have influenced the work that you do in the world today?
Yeah, I grew up in a kind of artistic milieu. My father was an abstract painter, originally from England. My mother was a book editor and also a writer. And her most well-known book was a memoir that she published in 1983 called Minor Characters, where she talked about her involvement with Kerouac when she was a young woman in New York. They were together for about a year and a half off and on, and she was with him when On the Road came out. And he suddenly became, after being ignored for, 18 years, whatever, he suddenly became a superstar.
So that's the Beat Generation right there. And just having your mom, such a significant figure in your life, be a part of that. Do you think that got you into, or at least immersed you more deeply into this world that you write about and you speak about today?
Well, yes and no. I mean, she herself was really not interested in the druggy side of the counterculture. She was always very suspicious of it. So she actually wasn't really that approving when I got interested in psychedelics. Basically, what had happened, as I write about in Breaking Open the Head, which, by the way, was my first book and long ago, so there's been a number of books since then. I was working in journalism as an editor and a writer for magazines, and I had a kind of existential meltdown. I realized that kind of the prevailing belief system of myself and my friends and most people in my world was kind of secular materialism, reductive materialism. So we all shared the belief that consciousness was entirely, a product of the brain. And therefore, after we died, that was it. Like everything was just obliterated. And I realized this was a kind of unspoken nihilism that actually caused kind of grief through the whole society. And then as I thought about it more and more, I was like, well, how do I know this is the case? It's just what I've been told. Is there a way that I could see for myself whether there are other layers of consciousness or the psyche or the soul or the spirit? Then I was, then the Beat kind of heritage mattered because they actually went through the same process. They were in the 40s. They were kind of like trying to figure out why, their world seemed so dead and why there was like no consciousness present when like professors spoke or politicians spoke. And that led them on this whole process to excavate kind of like presence and spontaneity. And it eventually led them into, meditation, Eastern meditation, exploration of all sorts of drugs. I mean, William Burroughs was one of the first, as I write about Breaking Open the Head, was one of the first Western kind of literary writers to explore ayahuasca. He went down in the early 50s, I think, looking for a way to stop heroin. And then as a result, Allen Ginsberg tried ayahuasca and also tried mescaline and then later LSD. Ginsberg kind of inspired Timothy Leary to take psychedelics to the people. Leary was a Harvard psychologist who had this, awakening through mushrooms and LSD, but then he didn't know what the right path was. And, Ginsberg, who was definitely one of my heroes, who I knew a little bit when I was young, was sort of a left-wing socialist, populist. He believed that, if there was a tool that could be good for humanity, everybody should take it.
I feel like everywhere I go today, humanity is talking about this in-between space of what was and what is to come. And we could feel this everywhere. You've been writing about this since 2012 or even before that, because this coming of age, this apocalypse type of setting that we're all in right now, these are far from ordinary times. And in your books, you discuss this through a wide range of scientific fields: anthropological, astrophysical, neurological, psychological. You kind of just take all these different diverse fields and merge them together into your work and into your writing. How would you explain the short CliffsNotes version of what is happening right now in society and humanity, this aquarian age that we've entered? And how would you consolidate that into everything you've experienced in your books and stuff today?
That's just a small question.
No big deal.
A little question. I mean, yeah, it's a lot to unpack there. I mean,
Yeah.
So I think you're sort of referring to the second book I wrote, which was 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, where I was looking at, and I talked about that stuff and breaking open the head a bit too, about kind of like Terence McKenna had been very interested in like time wave zero and this idea of like the singularity. And then a lot of tech people started writing about the singularity. Then there was Jose Arguelles, who I wrote about in 2012, who was somebody who really explored the Mayan calendar and believed that the indigenous Maya actually had, or the classical Maya had a maybe deeper understanding of time and the cycles of time, kind of the resonances between different time periods and so on. But yeah, I mean, when I wrote the 2012 book came out in 2006. And then we made a film, 2012 Time for Change. And then I wrote another book, which came out in 2016, How Soon Is Now. I would have to say that in some ways, I was more hopeful that there was going to be some collective mass awakening in a short period of time. I don't necessarily see that happening right now. And I am very concerned around the climate change, ecological situation, and how that's become, very divisive. And I think we're just in a very dangerous time. Things are going to go in very strange directions, but hopefully eventually there is this awakening, whether it's in our lifetimes or late in our lifetimes or later in our lifetimes, but it may also be accompanied by a lot of catastrophe. We're already seeing kind of the beginnings of a lot of catastrophe.
I mean, you say that you're not hopeful in terms of seeing this in our lifetime. You thought that we'd be a little bit further along right now in terms of our civilization and just what we're aware of and what we can do to prevent this global planetary collapse that seems to be happening. Not to be too depressing or anything, but if you've been studying this type of thing for a while, it's imminent. It's going to happen in our lifetime.
Yeah,
I sound like such a doomsdayer. Yeah. What can we do like on a personal and psychological level to prepare for this?
Everybody has to just decide what their path is within it. Once they allow it into their awareness, one path is just to kind of go on with your normal life and just say, okay, these are the years of, semi-normality, quasi-normality that are left to me, and I want to just enjoy them in this culture. Another idea would be to, change your life a lot to prepare for it. That could be like moving to, more self-sufficient community. But there's really, when this type of collapse happens, I think, all bets are going to be off in terms of how things will play out. I mean, you could make a huge amount of sacrifice to move into some off the grid community, and then you're like overrun by, white nationalists with heavy weapons. I don't really know. I mean, then the other idea would be to build social power. That's what I tried to do years ago. I tried to build a movement called the Evolver Network and so on. But that was also very difficult to keep going just because, the current capitalist system really wraps people tight. Like they have obligations of debt and career ambitions and all of this stuff. They don't have a lot of excess energy to address maybe like the more core aspects of life.
I mean, let's speak to that because it's a very real thing. Capitalism today, it just kind of sucks you in. And there's this almost initiation that you go through. At least I went through it personally. I know that a lot of people that are having these spiritual awakenings are just going through this where it's like, all right, if you let go of capitalism, when you just do the deep inner work, the shadow work, there are so many of these like initiations that take place. It's like the whole world is run by this matrix, this reality that is prevalent throughout our society. And if you're not tapped into that, it's like, okay, well, how are you going to get money? How are you going to have energy to continue doing this initiatory deep work? And I just find that in today's world, it's even right before I interviewed you. I mean, I go through this even 10 plus years after my original spiritual awakening, whatever you want to call it. Yesterday, my MacBook just completely fried, like out of nowhere. Here I am about to interview you today. And it's like, this stuff just doesn't go away. It's like a constant, it could just be of synchronicity or coincidence, but I still find that whenever I'm about to interview a really prominent guest about this type of thing, it's something weird and wonky always seems to happen that puts a wrench in my plans to get the message out. It's these deep initiations that make me realize that I am on the right track and that this type of message is important for humanity. But at the same time, how can we speak to the very real and valid idea that it is a challenging world that we live in when we just start to do this deep work? We start to look at these different dimensions and really just become more awake to what the matrix is made of.
I mean, the positive side of the situation is kind of the sort of increasing way that science is really demonstrating kind of that consciousness is the foundational reality. I just been writing a little bit about Paul Levy's book, The Quantum Revelation, and also I've been writing a bunch about Bernardo Kastrup, a philosopher who, among his other books, wrote a book called Why Materialism is Baloney. He basically argues that this sort of idealist perspective, that consciousness is the foundational baseline nature of reality, is basically consciousness, that what we experience as the physical is actually just a sort of projection of this foundational consciousness. That, I think, is a much more hopeful and kind of capacious model for the future. I'm putting a lot of my kind of hope, I guess, in that arena, that if we could really understand that, if enough of us could really understand that kind of consciousness is the determinant factor, consciousness is the underlying reality. This is what all the big, quantum physicists realized in the 20th century, like Werner Heisenberg and Niels Bohr and all these guys, David Bohm. They realized that the world was actually mental in nature, that it was actually like a gigantic consciousness that was, that was having these dreams, in a way, like the earth is like a dream that this consciousness is having.
I love that you've been writing about Paul Levy's work. I interviewed him on episode 65 of this podcast. His work is just really profound as well. And he's a Jungian, and he just applies a lot of that philosophy of dreams into his work. And once you start to embody that, it opens up this whole other world of synchronicities and access to different dimensions, for better and for worse. Another mentor that you've been influenced by is Rudolf Steiner, and his work is extremely robust. I mean, he's just such a brilliant dude, but he was really able to enter visionary realms without any form of psychedelic. And his mission is to bring reincarnations back to the West. We understand reincarnations, but I'd like to discuss the concept of the earth itself reincarnating. Through your direct experience and research, you developed the hypothesis that shamanic and mystical views of reality have validity, and that the modern world forfeited an understanding of intuitive aspects of materialism. We're done with the Newtonian era. We're moving into this quantum realm that Paul Levy talks about. Spirituality is finally catching up with science at this point. Do you think the modern world today in society and culture intentionally reduces this intuitive aspect of our being? And do you think that we can use these same instruments to help us awaken the mainstream consciousness? The propaganda and marketing today that everyone used to keep people at a certain frequency, can we use that to actually uplift people?
Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely hope that we can use, media and tools of, marketing and so on to, change people's minds. I don't see why not. I mean, that's what that kind of stuff does. Yeah, I guess that is Steiner's perspective, which is that there are, different, sort of super sensible beings or forms of consciousness that are constantly influencing human beings. He talked about Lucifer and Ahriman as two of the main ones, or the Luciferic, the Ahrimanic forces. He was a sort of esoteric Christian, so he took some of the ideas from Christianity, but he sort of elaborated them and made them more subtle and complex and so on. So in a way, what Christianity calls the devil, he splits up into these different forces that affect us. And it's, I don't think that one should believe, Steiner as like holy writ. I mean, it's more like when it comes to kind of these ineffable realms of like super sensible thought and so on, psychic realities, it's impossible to navigate without maps, even if the maps are not kind of the be all and end all. So for me, Steiner was like a cartographer. I mean, Jung also, the idea of the archetypes and so on, they kind of like give us, kind of conceptual scaffoldings that we can then use to try to climb it. As long as we remember that like the scaffolding is not like the real thing, the map is not the territory, So yeah, a lot of Steiner's ideas are very hard to grasp in a rational, from a purely like logical and rational approach. Although he himself was a very big proponent of what he talked about as spiritual science. He believed that we could learn how to use our, super sensible forms of perception and cognition to gain like certainty of these matters of these like subtle worlds and how they interact and inflect with our world. And yeah, as you say, I mean, he Steiner, was, I think he was born in like 1860, maybe, and died in like 1925. But he realized that he had all this ability that he could see into all these other worlds. I mean, the sense one gets is that he would simply close his eyes, and it was like he had a very active pineal gland, like he was getting ayahuasca visions or DMT visions just continuously when he tried to sleep. And he only needed a few hours of sleep a night. He would do these sort of special meditations. But he said that the particular mission of his life on Earth was to bring the knowledge of reincarnation back to the West, that we'd lost it in the transition from the pagan mystery schools to monotheism, Christianity, and so on, and that people do incarnate again and again. Like he wrote a series of books called Karmic Relationships, where he traces individuals back through their succession of past lives, like who, like Nietzsche or Karl Marx was, or some big politician, Bismarck or something. And but also he says that not only do people incarnate again and again, but that there's a sort of an evolutionary cycle that actually it's not like we're the same. As time goes on, we evolve new structures, new bodies, he called them. He said that actually when we have four bodies: the physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, and the I, or the ego, being the most recent one, and also therefore the most fragile, the one that's still just developing, which is kind of the this cycle of earthly life is about developing the healthy ego or the healthy individuality. But that the next cycle would be about the spirit self, which is like a fifth body that we were going to gain. So and that actually would happen on another incarnation of the Earth. So yeah, Steiner thought that not only do people incarnate again and again, but the Earth itself goes through different incarnations. This is actually, we're on the fourth incarnation of the Earth, moving towards the fifth incarnation, and the sense one gets from his work is that this fifth incarnation is coming pretty quickly. And he also talked about sort of Ahriman, who's the sort of spiritual force of like rationality and mechanism and kind of sterile materialism, would ultimately incarnate, I believe, in the 21st century, in the third millennium, take embodiment, and that would be a sort of a trigger for this next cycle of human existence.
I feel like we're all feeling this right now. It's part of the culture is really just getting away from that hustle culture and accessing more of this embodied state of being, this more presence, more depth, more pleasure. And at least in the circles that I run in, it's just so important to really regulate our nervous systems and get away from that frenetic pace that we've all been a part of throughout the 80s, 90s, 2000s. And now we're here in this 2023. What have we been doing with our lives? How can we just pause and just take deep breaths and really just feel this presence and feel like when we do that, we can tap into Gaia Sophia, which is something that is talked about in Gnosticism. I love that you bring in all these different concepts from John Lash to Rudolf Steiner to all these different profound writers that you bring into your work. How do we grok this idea that this earth is reincarnating? Because it's hard enough to wrap our minds around the idea of human reincarnation. And then when we bring in this concept of the earth reincarnating and this pleroma and all these really fascinating ideas that I feel like come through me in these sometimes really profound realizations that I have personally, how do we explain that in a mythopoetic way to humanity in a way that actually makes sense in a logical way? Is that even possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I guess I would say that not everybody's the same. I'm very much like an intellectual. I mean, it may sound like I'm very esoteric, but I actually think that my thinking is pretty critical and analytic. And when I find things that don't kind of fulfill my sense of desire for kind of explanation or like a fact or whatever or evidence, let's say, I'm kind of put off. Other people experience things differently, but I think what's very important is to, as I said before, kind of realize that the map is not the territory. Like a lot of times we find out some new bit of information and we have a huge will to believe in it because it actually supports kind of like an intuition we have or a preconception we have. And this is how, for instance, like a lot of the yoga community, and sort of the sort of people interested in spirituality and so on in the West Coast ended up kind of supporting, QAnon. There was a kind of confusion, not really thinking very clearly, kind of wanting there to be this kind of like mythological saga happening with David Icke's reptile people and so on. We just and that may be happening on some level. I mean, another thing is that just our way of thinking is very dualistic. One of my favorite writers for trying to sort this stuff out is this guy, Patrick Harper, who wrote a book called Philosopher's Secret Fire and so on. But yeah, I mean, the thoughts of like ancient people, indigenous people, are not necessarily as dualistic as ours. Like we always want to see something as like true or false. Like this narrative is like true and that one is false. But actually things that are mythological, it may actually work a little bit different. But in any event, yeah. So I think we need to always try to be careful that we don't just like fall into some new kind of religion or belief structure that then like takes us over. So that's a danger. And then, yeah, I mean, for some people, they'll want to know about the Gnostics and the Pleroma and have like, Steiner's Ahriman and, Lucifer and have a whole intellectual kind of armature for understanding like subtle phenomena. And for other people that they'll be happy with Course in Miracles or, Eckhart Tolle, or that's as far as they want to go. So, just, everyone's different, I think.
Then how do you find what is exciting to you? Coming from an academic, intellectual perspective, do you actually test and embody any of these principles that you study when you're writing about them? Or do you just do it from a intellectual way and very academic way? I'm just curious what your process is in terms of your writing.
I don't consider myself very academic. I love to research, and actually, I have to be honest, I really love these like shadow libraries you can find on the internet where you can basically get any book that you want for free. Because I think it's terrible there's not something like Spotify where you can just subscribe to one site and then, access the world's knowledge or whatever. That's allowed me to like really fulfill a lot of my, interest in terms of research, different subjects and so on.
Okay, good to know.
They exist, and you can find incredible archive. But I don't consider that I'm like just an intellectual in a heady process. I mean, for me, the ideas that I write about, I write a lot on my Substack. That's like my main venue right now. I have like a newsletter, but for me, it's very emotional and very heart based. And I don't think there's like, thinking is something that should be from the heart, and the heart has like neurons. The heart is also a thinking organ. I think sometimes we make a mistake when we, kind of try to separate like feeling and thinking too much. Although I think we have to be, clear. And this is where like somebody like Steiner talked about this. We have to know, when we're thinking, when we're feeling, and when we're willing, and when we're like mixing that stuff up.
And I'm sure that a lot of the psychedelics that you speak about in your book that you've done have allowed you to be so open with your heart.
Yeah, maybe they probably did help. Yeah.
It's clear that you are bringing this into your writing and into your work. Do you think it's possible to access that heart opening and this non-ordinary state of consciousness without psychedelics?
Yeah, but I think that's another, place where everybody's quite different. I mean, up until very recently, there was a huge amount of sort of negative judgment against people who use psychedelics. Like sometimes I've had like debates with like, kind of Eastern, people from like an Eastern lineage or Tantra lineage. And they were very like scoffing at the whole psychedelic thing. But now, it's become quite obvious that, for a lot of people that those have been the keys to allow them to, break out of their restricted, belief system or the materialist belief system and embrace like a wider perspective. But, there are other people who don't need psychedelics at all. And I would say it's not even advised for them. Some people are very sensitive on their own, or some people are just, living in a different way, so it's I mean, now it's changing, of course. A lot of places are decriminalizing, which is also good. But it really makes you search your soul and really decide, whether this is something that you want to do, even if it's going against, this prevailing society and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's such a misconception around psychedelics, and a lot of people think that it's a means of escaping reality. And society and culture and the way it's framed in the mainstream turns psychedelics into this horrible drug that nullifies you. And it really has lost that positive connection if you're not in the right circles. Psychedelics, what they are is an amplifier. It allows you to do deep shadow work, and it can sharpen the brain and go deep. It seems like there's a lot of people, at least in the circles that I run in, who really want to get this innate need to experience non-ordinary states of consciousness. But I also find that it can be addicting, and the substance itself is not habit forming. It's supposed to be not habit forming, but a lot of people that I know have done like over 300 ayahuasca ceremonies and stuff. And I just feel like this just becomes another pattern and another tool and another habit that we are experiencing in a negative, addictive way. Can you speak to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a case by case basis. I mean, doing ayahuasca, I mean, even for some of the indigenous people, it was kind of their entertainment also. They called it like forest television, You would take it, you could look into like other worlds or other parts of the world, or, see what your, cousin was doing in another town or whatever. I'm not really averse to people taking these things for all sorts of reasons. I don't think they always have to be, in the context of like trying to heal some trauma or get some therapeutic aid or something. But I feel there's another part to your question that I've like lost a little bit.
Can you see that it's addictive or habit forming in any
Yeah, well,
way?
it's it can be habit forming. it's definitely not physically addictive.
Mm.
You kind of you may find that you just desire the peak experience over and over again. Yeah, that can be a problem. But it's certainly on the scale of problems like a lot less than like fentanyl or alcohol or tobacco. Nobody's like huffing mushrooms, psilocybin like every day and like huge quantities to, and the problem is that generally they make you more sensitive and aware. So they're not exactly an escape from your problems. They can actually make your problems even more present.
Exactly. Yeah. It allows you to see through the veils, peer below the surface of things.
Yeah,
Is that how you'd explain it?
I think so. Even with the psychedelics, they're different. Iboga, which I wrote about in Breaking Open the Head, is seems to be incredibly powerful for particularly heroin addiction. And it seems to have some neurochemical capacity where people who are addicted, they have to get off it for a few days, but after they take the iboga, they have no withdrawal symptoms and no more physical craving for the substance unless they fall into the old habit again and start taking it. And accompanying with that is a kind of psychological, often, not always, but psychological process where you see the childhood conditions and the reasons why you were sucked into this particular vortex or whatever.
Hmm.
And then we're seeing like psilocybin, I guess, is being used for depression and obsessive compulsive disorder and end of life anxiety. So yeah, it's opening up a lot of toolkits. So it'll be interesting to see. At the moment there's this gold rush of corporatization and commodification going on, where these billion-dollar companies have jumped into the market. I think it's going to be very weird and interesting because basically the pharmaceutical model is completely the opposite to psychedelics, right? Like the pharmaceutical company wants you to take something every day because that's their profit. If they keep you hooked on, Zoloft or Ritalin or whatever for 20 years, then they're making money every day. Generally, with psychedelics, you take it, once, twice, or three times, and that's, you should be done with the trauma and you're really not needing to have, that kind of therapeutic setting anymore, or to even take it, on your own. So it's going to be interesting. My concern is that it's going to end up being sort of Brave New World-ish, where they'll try to sort of create versions of these substances that are like daily supplements. So they sort of hook people into kind of something that just makes them feel better. You and
Mm.
rather than being like so revelatory, it would be more like an ongoing like buzz that you could return to.
Yeah.
Because they're going to
That's
tweak all the molecules and play with all the parameters.
That's kind of scary. You can definitely see that happening with the corporatization of everything and the way that we're going right now with humanity and the quest for self-knowledge. How would you put into words like what you predict for the future? Are we going to head in that direction? Is it Huxleyan and Brave New Worldish? Do you see people doing this work, this shadow work, and bringing all their triggers and traumas to the surface in such a way that we can circumvent this pharmaceutical profits taking over and the corporatization of psychedelics?
Yeah, there's definitely some people who are doing integration and shadow work. And there's also a lot more people who are offering that kind of integration counseling to people who go through medicine journeys. But yeah, trauma has obviously become like a huge kind of topic in the culture, like a focus, almost like a fixation. Sometimes I worry that gets a little unhealthy too, though, because it's like I think we could all kind of accept in this society everybody is traumatized. Boys are traumatized by having to suppress their emotions, like Warren Farrell writes about. Women are traumatized by, patriarchal oppression and sexual, kind of like aggression, all this stuff. But yeah, at a certain point, I think somehow we have to get past the point of always like dwelling in the trauma, because I don't know. It just doesn't seem to be leading to a resolution in a way. Like life is very short and fragile, and eventually we somehow have to say that we're kind of healed enough then to do another level of work for society or something.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for saying that. I completely agree. I think that we are so hyper fixated on trauma and doing all this work that it's like, when are we going to just be finally healed and present and able to really just live our lives at the same time? Know that there is always sometimes an underlying nihilism that we're all experiencing. It's important to kind of draw that balance, I think, in terms of understanding that trauma does exist, but not get too hyperfixated on it so that we can evolve as humanity continues to experience all the weirdness that we're going through. How much weirder is it going to get? Do you think it's going to continue getting weirder over time? I know like a year ago, there were aliens coming out on the news and people just didn't even flinch because things were already so weird right now in society and culture. Do you think that the future of humanity is going to continue to speed up and get even weirder? Or do you think we're evening out a little bit now?
Well, I mean, I don't even know what's going to happen. I wouldn't, as I said, I don't feel that I can predict. I mean, I did a little bit of work with this guy, Christopher Bosch. There's one of his videos on my platform, liminal.news. And then we had a discussion. He wrote a book called LSD and the Mind of the Universe. He did a long series of very high dose LSD sessions and therapy. He got a whole vision, which he's written about in a few books, another called Dark Night, Early Dawn. And in that vision, we go through, humanity goes through this sort of catastrophic, winnowing where like, everything feels like right on the edge and, food supplies and water supplies and all that stuff. But somehow we pull through that and kind of new communities form, maybe many people are no longer with us, but the survivors have kind of graduated into a different, cooperative kind of state of being and start to rebuild. That's his vision. I mean, I thought that was interesting. But, it could go lots of ways. I mean, clearly we can see with like, the right-wing Republicans, there's a potential for kind of fascism take over. At the same time, with the sort of neoliberal Democrats, there's the potential for the sort of World Economic Forum, everybody's chipped, digital passports, digital vaccine passes, control, technocratic, authoritarian control system. It's sad that those seem to be the main options right now. Hopefully, some other thing will emerge. I like some of the ideas of degrowth, that maybe we should be thinking about, removing some of the technology and not, redesigning our financial system so it's not, so growth isn't prioritized. Yeah, I mean, the situation is like super tricky. I mean, you have the rain still in California. I mean, that's also been another, just example of, even at this point, how out of balance all the systems are and how that's just going to be like, all the feedback loops are just going to make that, much, much worse in the next decade.
Yeah, absolutely. The rain hasn't stopped. So it's been pretty much 2 weeks of torrential downpours here in California. It's like known as a cyclone or something. So it's definitely not normal weather. That's for sure.
Yeah, there isn't really going to be a normal anymore. I don't think that's, the big threat is going to be agriculture because, plants don't necessarily have the capacity to adapt very quickly to these rapid changes, that are happening so fast. And we're already seeing a lot of like shortages and different problems that could get, much, much worse quickly.
Okay. Is there any good news that you can share with us? Anything good that can come out of all of this
Yeah,
craziness?
I wrote a whole book, How Soon Is Now, where I tried to envision kind of like a path beyond. I mean, we would need kind of a collective awakening that really has a local community model. And so that people start, in a way, because of, we feel very disconnected, detached, but actually small groups of people have a lot of power right now. And if there was a movement in the other direction, it would actually be pretty easy to put a lot of pressure on governments, corporations, and so on. They wouldn't even be expecting it. So that's interesting.
I've interviewed Jim Rutt about Game B. There's this whole movement around moving away from Game A to get to Game B. And I just feel like we're such in the embryonic phases of this that it hasn't really taken off in a real way, in a tangible way, at least that I've seen or that I've experienced personally. I know there's these pockets in these communities that have, but I just, be a part of the solution and to bring this to life because I know that it's possible. And maybe I'm too much of an idealist, but I just want to put my energy into hope for humanity and positivity instead of focusing on the doom and gloom, which, it's definitely a tricky balance for sure. So.
Yeah, but I think also it's a bit of an issue, like our, cultural tonality is always supposed to be very light. So, we're not really supposed to just like hold our focus on negativity, on grief or sadness or sorrow. Because everybody is like, a self-entrepreneur now and is supposed to be like optimizing their own potential. With that comes a kind of like, we sort of internalize this idea of like, okay, we have to be super positive and cheerful all the time and market ourselves the best way and show how we're doing like all the proper yoga and meditation, how good we look, and we're in like Tulum and our hats or whatever. But there's something I think I find that makes me very uncomfortable. I mean, I'm more of like Frankfurt School, kind of European intellectual type. Like, no, things are very fucked up right now. I'm sorry to say. I mean, things are very problematic. I mean, the extraction, the expropriation of capital from the middle class and the working class to the tiny elite at the top, like systems of domination and control, technology moving so fast that we can't even like get our heads around it, with the possibility of large scale unemployment, and this climate emergency, and the breakdown of the ecosystems. I mean, I think it's okay to take all that stuff seriously. I mean, I guess I've reached a point of like non-attachment where like I'm still totally peaceful and happy like talking about stuff like this. It doesn't touch me in like a core level. I surrendered in a way. And I think that we need to actually like we have to stop being so terrified that we're going to lose, our fan base or our followers or whatever, if we're actually take a moment to actually be serious and feel the sort of heavy, reality of a lot of what's happening.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I think that it is important to grieve and to really understand the dark side of what's really going on today. And I love that about your work. You're very matter of fact, and this is what's happening in the world. And part of the reason why I love your writing and your style is that you have surrendered and you can write about uncertainty. You don't have all the answers. And that's what makes a really brilliant writer. And that's why discovered your work a few months ago, and I've just eaten everything up, because your uncertainty brings me and probably your audience more certainty. It's like, okay, we're all in this together. We all have no clue what's going on, but at least you're giving a voice to that uncertainty through your surrendering, and then you're writing about it. So I appreciate that.
What I am relatively certain about is that, there are other dimensions of reality. I mean, that, there's other forms of consciousness that, we can tap into. There's other psychic potentialities that we haven't even begun to explore yet. So that I think is very, very exciting. And one of the ideas that I've explored or put out as a theory or a hypothesis is like, okay, well, maybe we're putting ourselves in such a dire strait so that we actually force ourselves to go through, as you say, kind of like this initiatory process and then kind of access these like hidden, latent capacities of the psyche. Maybe 100,000 people believe that they could do it. We could change the weather with our thoughts. I mean, I think, weather shamanism, for instance, is a real phenomenon, like guys down in South America who, they do a rain dance and, often it rains, or a sun dance and often the sun comes out. I don't think it's impossible that these types of powers are going to be understood, in a scientific framework, and a sort of expanded scientific framework at some point. So, I get very excited about that. I think that, and also I guess, we shouldn't be so afraid of death. It's like, the life is, a transitory phenomenon. Like, even if you live for 90 years, it's like nothing, our society is trying to, avoid death, hide it away at all costs. And somehow that makes it just bite back even harder in a way.
Yeah, what we resist persists. So you recently brought online this literary magazine for the age of transformation, and I love it. It's on liminal.ghost.io. Do you want to speak a little bit about why you wanted to bring these different voices into the online world or the mainstream consciousness?
Yeah, well, I just have like a long history of starting magazines. I started a literary magazine in high school, and this magazine Open City in my 20s with friends. Reality Sandwich, which was a big magazine of like the psychedelic community early on.
Excellent. Yeah. So listeners can go to your Substack to find you and your work online. And where else can listeners find you on social media?
I'm on the usual social media things, Twitter, Instagram, with my name, Facebook,
okay, great.
Also personal Facebook. Right now, I really like the Substack the most, mostly hanging out.
Awesome. We will put the link to your Substack in the show notes. Make sure to send everybody over there.
Good.
Thank you so much for joining me on The Art of Humanity.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to hang out with you, and hope we stay in touch.